He called her Barren, abandoned her in a hospital bed, and went to celebrate another woman's baby. What he didn't know was that his wife, Tiffany Amber, was carrying a miracle he'd already thrown away. Before we get into how Femi humiliated Tiffany, tell me in the comments, where are you watching this from? I love knowing where my audience are. Maybe I could visit you someday. And if Tiffany's comeback would be best served hot, then subscribe to the channel. Now, let's get into how it all happened. Weeks later, when she walked into court, radiant, pregnant, and ready to sign the divorce papers, the look on Femi Branch's face said it all. He had no idea the woman he discarded was about to rewrite both their destinies. The story of Tiffany Amber Branch doesn't begin with power or revenge. It begins with heartbreak. 5 years of marriage had turned from laughter and shared dreams to silence and sharp words. Femi, once her biggest supporter, now came home later each night, his phone face down, his smile forced. Family dinners grew colder, and whispers followed her wherever she went. She can't give him a child. He called her barren, unworthy, a burden to his future. But fate has a way of favoring the quiet ones, the women who bend but don't break. When Tiffany went into labor early, scared and alone, Femi wasn't there. He was across town, grinning for photos at his mistress's baby shower, pretending to be the man she'd once believed he was. By the time she realized what kind of husband she'd married, it was too late. The hospital room was empty except for her grief. That night changed her. Because pain doesn't just end you. Sometimes it wakes you up. And when the day came to finalize their divorce, the same man who once called her barren walked into court certain he'd already won. Until she opened those doors, glowing, composed, and carrying the proof that love and destiny had never needed his permission. But before that day, before the courtroom, the cameras, and the shocked faces, there were the years that hollowed them both. The slow unraveling of a marriage built on dreams and undone by pride. Let's go back to where it all began. Atlanta looked golden that evening. Sunlight spilled across the manicured lawns of Peachtree Heights, glinting off luxury cars and glass panel windows. Inside one of those pristine homes, the Branch's house gleamed like the picture of success. White marble counters, framed wedding photos, and a silence so deep it hummed. For 5 years, Tiffany Amber Branch had done everything right. She had loved him fiercely, believed in his dreams, built him up when no one else did. She'd spent nights editing his pitch decks, finding investors, smiling through dinner parties where everyone toasted his genius and barely noticed hers. And for a while, it felt worth it. Femi Branch, her husband, was everything the world admired. Handsome, sharp, ambitious. A self-made real estate developer with charm that filled every room. When they'd married, she believed his love was the kind that could weather anything. But 5 years can hollow out even the strongest house. And theirs had grown hollow quietly. It began with small things, missed calls, distracted glances, dinners eaten in silence. At first, Tiffany told herself it was just work. He stressed, that's all. The market had shifted. The deals were harder, and she wanted to believe the distance was temporary. But then came the doctors, then came the tests, and then came the silence that followed every result that read negative. They tried everything, every specialist, every procedure, and each time the results were the same. One night, she found him sitting on the edge of the bed, head in his hands. Maybe it's just not meant to be, he said softly. She reached for his arm. Femi, we'll keep trying. He looked up at her then, and for the first time in their marriage, she saw not exhaustion, but disappointment. Not at the situation. At her. That night, he didn't touch her. The Sundays with his family became worse. His mother's voice, smooth and cutting, filled every dinner table with carefully aimed pity. A family isn't complete without children, she'd say, dabbing her lips delicately. But you know, some women's bodies just aren't built for it. Tiffany would smile tightly, nails digging into her palm under the table. Femi never corrected her. He just kept cutting his steak, jaw tight, eyes avoiding hers. Later in the car, she finally whispered, "You could have said something." He shrugged. "What do you want me to say, Tiff? That my mother's wrong? That you can have kids? You don't know that." The words hit harder than a slap. He didn't even say we. Months slipped by. He started coming home late, claiming he was meeting clients or investors. The smell of whiskey and cologne followed him like shadows. Tiffany stayed up most nights, laptop open, half working, half waiting. Sometimes she'd hear his car pulling long after midnight. She'd go to the window, see him sitting in the driver's seat for a few minutes, texting someone, before finally walking inside. When he did, he'd kiss her forehead absent-mindedly. "You shouldn't wait up." She'd smile weakly, hiding the ache behind it. "I wasn't." She always was. At work, people whispered. They'd once called them the branch power couple, but now they lowered their voices when she walked past. Everyone in Atlanta's corporate circle knew when a man like Femi started attending events alone. It was only a matter of time. Her best friend, Danielle, tried to break the truth gently. "Tiff, men like him, they need to feel like kings. And when life humbles them, they look for someone else to worship them." Tiffany stared out the window at the city lights and said quietly, "Then I guess I built him too high." By the 5th year, the warmth was gone. Their home felt like a showroom. Expensive, beautiful, lifeless. She walked to the kitchen each morning and see his untouched coffee mug, the half-buttoned cufflinks on the counter, his cologne still hanging in the air. Sometimes, she'd replay the early days, their tiny apartment, how they danced barefoot while unpacking boxes, how he used to call her my lucky charm. Now, the only luck left was the kind that ran out. It happened one Thursday evening. He came home late again, shirt unbuttoned, tie loose. His phone buzzed nonstop. "Who's calling?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "Work. Work doesn't wear red lipstick," she said softly. He froze for half a second before smirking. "Don't start." "Start what, Femi? A conversation? Because God forbid we have one that's not about your schedule or my body." He dropped his briefcase. "You want to talk about your body? Fine. You've seen the doctors. You've read the tests. Maybe you just need to accept it." Her heart clenched. "Accept what?" "That maybe God didn't make you for this." She stared at him, stunned. "For what?" "For being a woman. For being a mother, Tiff. And I'm tired pretending it's not killing me too." The silence that followed was the kind that breaks things. She turned away before he could see her cry, then stopped pretending. He left that night. The next morning, she found a text. "Don't wait up tonight." Meeting ran late. It was 7 a.m. She deleted it without replying. Hours later, as she gathered the laundry, she noticed his blazer draped over a chair. She picked it up, shaking out the sleeves, then froze. There it was, a faint, perfect lipstick stain, coral pink, on the inside of his collar, the kind she'd never wear. She stood there for a long time, fingers trembling, the silence of the house pressing in. Her mind replayed every dinner, every excuse, every moment she defended him to herself, to everyone. It wasn't work. It wasn't stress. It wasn't time. It was someone else. Someone who didn't have to carry the blame he'd made her wear. That night, Tiffany didn't wait for him. She turned off all the lights, curled up on the couch, and stared at the wedding photo on the mantel. Him holding her hand, both of them smiling like forever was certain. Now she could see it clearly. The cracks had started even then. The smiles were just paint over crumbling walls. She whispered into the dark, "You promised to stay." No one answered. Only the sound of rain against the window pane, soft, endless, unforgiving. When the clock struck midnight, headlights flashed across the room. His car. She didn't move. She listened as the front door opened, then closed. He didn't call her name. Didn't say a word. Just the sound of footsteps upstairs, the creak of the bed, and then silence again. It was in that moment, alone, heart heavy, mascara dried on her cheeks, that she finally accepted the truth. Her marriage wasn't breaking. It was already broken. And somewhere out there, under Atlanta's glimmering skyline, her husband was laughing with someone who didn't even know what she had lost. Tiffany lay back, eyes open in the dark, one hand resting flat on her stomach. A quiet thought pulsed through her. There has to be more than this. But she didn't yet know that soon there would be. That soon, The woman lying in the dark would walk into a courtroom and make the world stop breathing. For now, there was only the beginning of the end, and a lipstick stain on a collar that told her everything she needed to know. The contraction started just after sunset. It was a Thursday in early March, the kind of night when the rain fell softly at first, like a warning. Tiffany had been alone in the house, curled up on the couch with a throw blanket and a bowl of soup that had long gone cold. She had planned to tell Femi the news the next day. She hadn't even let the word pregnant settle on her tongue yet. It felt fragile, like something that would break if she said it out loud. At first, the pain was dull and low, like a tight band around her stomach. She pressed a hand against it and tried to steady her breathing. "It's too soon," she whispered to no one. The next contraction came sharper. She dropped the spoon. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone on the coffee table. She dialed Femi's number. Ring, ring, ring. "Pick up," she whispered. Voicemail. She tried again, and again. By the fourth call, the contractions had grown closer. Her breathing turned shallow, panic crawling up her throat. She grabbed her coat and purse, barely managing to slip on shoes as the rain outside thickened into a downpour. The Uber driver didn't say much. Maybe it was the way she kept gripping her stomach, or the pale sheen of sweat across her forehead. As the car wove through Atlanta's slick streets, a flash of headlights caught her eye. She looked up at the digital billboard outside Lux Lounge, a place Femi loved. And there he was, her husband. His face filled the screen, his arm draped around Vanessa King, the woman she suspected but never confronted him about. The image was crisp and clear, both of them under a canopy of gold balloons, smiling wide at a baby shower. She stared, disbelief pounding through her chest harder than the contractions. Femi had left her alone in this house for that. At Emory University Hospital, fluorescent lights buzzed above her as nurses rushed to get her checked in. "How far along?" 27 weeks, she gasped. "Where's your husband?" The question landed like a blade. She couldn't answer. They wheeled her into labor and delivery. The world blurred into white walls, beeping monitors, voices that sounded too far away. Somewhere between contractions, she gripped the rails of the bed and whispered, "Femi." Not a call, not a curse, just a whisper. A nurse named Trina leaned down, her eyes kind but steady. "We'll take care of you, sweetheart. He'll get here." But he didn't. Hours stretched like years. Rain battered the windows like it was trying to get in. Every time her phone buzzed, she lunged for it, only to see another missed call from Danielle, or alert from Instagram. Then came the one notification she'll never forget. A tagged photo at Femi Branch of Vanessa's baby shower, holding a glass of champagne, wearing the same suit he wore to their anniversary dinner 2 years before. He was grinning. She was screaming, not from heartbreak, from labor. When the baby came, the room filled with noise. Beeps, shouts, a doctor's voice steady but urgent. Then silence, the kind of silence that tells you everything. Her baby never cried. A nurse wrapped the tiny body in a white blanket and held it for only a moment before quietly walking away. The room suddenly felt too big, too white, too cold. A nurse whispered, "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Branch." But she wasn't Mrs. Branch anymore, not really. She was a woman who had spent years carrying someone else's dreams and had been left with ashes. At 3:17 a.m., a doctor placed a clipboard on her bedside table. "We did everything we could," he said softly. "You were very early. You're going to need to rest." She nodded like she'd heard him, but she hadn't really. Her hand went to her stomach automatically. It was flat now, empty. She turned her head toward the window. Rain still pelted the glass, loud and relentless. The city lights blurred, streaking down like tears. She whispered into the silence. "He said I was barren. Now he'll never know what he threw away." The nurse adjusted the blankets around her, but it didn't matter. No amount of warmth could fix a hollow like this. Her phone was still in her hand when she drifted in and out of sleep. No messages from Femi. Not even a call. She didn't know it then, but across town, he was still laughing. Someone had posted a video of him clinking glasses with Vanessa as people cheered for their new beginning. Tiffany didn't cry loudly. She didn't scream or throw anything. She just let the quiet tears roll down her face. It wasn't just a child she lost that night. It was the last piece of her that still believed Femi would choose her. At 5:30 a.m., a nurse switched off the monitor and dimmed the lights. The room sank into a heavy darkness. Tiffany stared at her left hand. The diamond ring caught a sliver of light from the hallway, a cruel reminder of the promises that had died long before this night. Her fingers twitched, but she didn't take it off. Not yet. The last sound before she drifted into an exhausted half-sleep was the rain tapping against a window. It sounded like someone knocking. But no one came out a month later. Atlanta glowed the way only southern cities could after rain. Warm, bright, alive. The world was moving on. Everyone, it seemed, except Tiffany Amber Branch. The morning sunlight spilled across her sister Danielle's guest room, glinting off unopened mail and untouched food. Tiffany sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling through her phone with shaking fingers. Her eyes burned from sleepless nights, but she couldn't stop looking. There he was again, Femi Branch. Perfect suit, effortless smile, arm around his new mistress Vanessa King. The headline read, Atlanta's new power couple stuns at the Phoenix Foundation Gala. Her thumb trembled as she swiped through photos. Vanessa, in a gold dress, laughing up at him like she'd won the world. He was whispering something into her ear in one shot, champagne in hand, his ring finger bare. The caption beneath it read, 5 years with his ex-wife, and now Femi Branch finally has it all. The article went viral overnight. Downstairs, the television hummed with morning news. Danielle's voice drifted up the hall. Tiff, you should eat something, sis. Tiffany didn't answer. She just sat there, phone still open, pain blooming like wildfire in her chest. Every pixel of those photos felt like a new betrayal. Her own mother had called the night before. Tiffany, I don't know why you're still dwelling on him. Men leave when women stop giving them what they need. You should have kept him interested. Those words replayed in her mind over and over, stabbing like tiny knives. As if she hadn't begged, prayed, fought to keep her marriage alive. As if the miscarriage in the hospital and the empty house hadn't already stripped her bare. But the world didn't care about her grief. The world only loved the spectacle. Downstairs, Danielle poured coffee into a chipped mug and glanced at her sister, standing in the doorway. You're still reading that mess? Tiffany gave a humorless laugh. You know what hurts the most? They call them goals. He abandoned me in a hospital, and now he's some kind of success story. Danielle crossed her arms, her tone fierce but kind. People only see the pictures, not the price. You taught him everything he knows, Tiff. The man walking those red carpets? You built him. Tiffany looked away. And I made him strong enough to destroy me. No, Danielle said softly. You made him strong enough to think he could. Don't let the man you created be the one who ruins you. Tiffany blinked back tears. It's too late. It's not, Danielle said, reaching for her hand. It's never too late to stop breaking your own heart. The rest of the day passed in muted silence. Rain clouds rolled in again, turning the city gray. Danielle went to work, and Tiffany stayed behind, pacing the small apartment, staring out the window at the skyline she used to love. Atlanta had once represented hope, the place where she and Femi dreamed of building their empire. Now, every street corner carried a memory she didn't want. The restaurant where he proposed, the office she helped him design, even the highway exit where she'd waited in traffic, thinking he was stuck at work when he was really with her. She couldn't breathe here anymore. Her phone buzzed again, a text from an old friend. Saw Femi and Vanessa on TV. You holding up okay? She turned the phone face down on the table. The answer didn't matter. That evening, she walked into the guest room and opened her suitcase. She folded each blouse carefully, mechanical, as if the act of packing could keep her from thinking. Her movements were calm, but her heart pounded in her chest like a drum. She paused by the mirror. Her reflection looked tired, thinner than before, but her eyes, those eyes, still carried the fire that had built a man's empire. I'm done letting his shadow define me, she whispered to herself. Her fingers grazed a small keychain hanging from her suitcase zipper, a gift from Femi when they first married. It read, "To my forever." She unclipped it, held it in her palm for a moment, and then dropped it into the trash. When Danielle returned home, she found Tiffany sitting by the window, bags packed, gaze steady. "I'm leaving," Tiffany said quietly. "Leaving? Where?" "New York. I've got an offer from a branding firm there. A fresh start." Danielle nodded slowly. "You sure about this?" Tiffany smiled faintly. "I've never been more sure of anything." Danielle crossed the room and pulled her into a hug. "Then go remind the world who you are." For the first time in weeks, Tiffany exhaled without pain. That night, as she boarded a late flight to New York, the city lights of Atlanta twinkled below, each one fading like an old memory she no longer needed. She looked out the plane window, her hand pressed lightly against her stomach. She didn't know yet about the life quietly growing inside her. All she knew was that she was finally choosing herself. And that was the beginning of everything. Hey, if Tiffany's story gripped you even a little, why haven't you subscribed yet? We are watching this woman lose everything, stand in the fire, and we don't know if she will make out. Will you stay to find out? The morning light in Brooklyn was nothing like Atlanta. It didn't pour through the windows in gold. Here, it struggled through brick and smog, landing in tired gray patches across the floor of Tiffany Branch's new apartment. But she didn't mind. Gray was honest. It didn't pretend to shine. The past few weeks had been a blur of noise and exhaustion. Her new job at Mason and Reed Branding, a small agency tucked between coffee shops and brownstones, was fast-paced and relentless. Tight deadlines, tight budgets, and tighter smiles from co-workers who wondered why the new girl seemed to carry a storm behind her eyes. Tiffany threw herself into work anyway. She needed something to anchor her, something that wasn't Femi Branch's ghost or Atlanta's whispers. She woke before dawn, caught the subway, and stayed late most nights designing campaigns she barely remembered finishing. Sleep came in fragments. Meals skipped, calls unanswered. But even in the chaos, she was starting to breathe again. It was a Thursday afternoon when her body finally gave out. One moment, she was in a meeting explaining a brand mock-up. The next, her vision blurred. The room tilted. The last thing she remembered was the sound of her co-worker's voice shouting her name as everything faded into white. When she came to, the scent of antiseptic filled her nose. A slow, rhythmic beep echoed beside her. She blinked. A soft voice spoke. "Mrs. Branch, you're at St. Luke's Clinic. You fainted at work, but you're stable now." Her head throbbed. "I'm fine," she murmured, trying to sit up. The doctor, a kind-faced woman in her 40s, placed a hand on her arm. "You were dehydrated and your blood pressure dropped. We ran some tests to be safe." She hesitated, then smiled. "Tiffany, you're pregnant." The words hung in the air, impossibly still. Tiffany stared at her, lips parted, eyes wide. "Pregnant?" "Yes," the doctor said gently. "A little over 2 months. The fainting spell likely came from exhaustion, but the baby's heartbeat is strong. You'll need rest, nutrition, and less stress." Tiffany pressed a hand to her stomach, her mind spinning. Pregnant. The word echoed like thunder in her chest. Her throat tightened as tears welled in her eyes. Tears she hadn't expected, hadn't earned, but couldn't stop. All those years of being told she couldn't. All the insults, the pitying glances, the quiet shame that haunted her every night she went to bed alone. And now this, she laughed softly through the tears, a sound broken and beautiful all at once. "He said I was barren," she whispered. "And here you are." The doctor smiled knowingly. "Sometimes life waits until we're strong enough to carry it." Tiffany nodded, unable to speak. For the first time in months, her chest didn't ache, it expanded. When she returned home that night, she stood by the window, city lights flickering outside like scattered hope. She thought of Femi, of the hospital, of the ring she'd finally stopped wearing. He would never know, not about this, not about the miracle he'd thrown away. She pulled out her phone on instinct, opening social media. And there it was, the universe's cruel symmetry. Just engaged. Femi Branch and Vanessa King celebrate love in New York. The post had gone viral. Photos filled the screen. Vanessa's manicured hand showing off a diamond ring. Femi's proud grin as if he'd never broken anyone in his life. Tiffany stared for a long time, expression unreadable. She expected anger, but what she felt instead was release. Let him celebrate. Let the world believe what it wanted. She had something more powerful than vengeance. She had life. That night, Tiffany sat on her bed, knees drawn to her chest. Her apartment was quiet except for the soft hum of traffic outside. She placed a trembling hand on her stomach, closing her eyes. "I don't know where we're going, little one," she whispered, voice trembling. "But we'll figure out together." The city lights flickered against her face, painting her tears gold. "You and me," she said softly. "We start over." She didn't need to say his name anymore. The world she was building now had no room for it. New York had a way of erasing the past. The city didn't care about broken hearts or unfinished stories. It demanded motion. And for the first time in a long time, Tiffany Amber Branch moved without permission, without apology. The first few weeks were hard. The noise, the pace, the cold that crept through the old pipes in her Brooklyn apartment. But the anonymity was a blessing. No one here looked at her with pity. No one whispered about the husband who left or the child that never lived. In this city, she wasn't the barren wife. She was simply Tiffany. Every morning, she walked to work with purpose. Her small branding agency wasn't glamorous, but it gave her stability and a quiet pride that was hers alone. She learned to navigate client calls, project deadlines, and the subway chaos like a woman who had rebuilt herself from ashes. Each day, she felt a little stronger. One crisp morning, she received a call that would change everything. The number was unfamiliar, the voice deep and measured. "Mrs. Branch, this is Harold McKinney, your late father's attorney. I believe we met briefly at his memorial years ago." Her breath caught. "Mr. McKinney, I remember. It's been a while." "Yes, ma'am. I came across some documents in our archives that I think you should review. Would you have time to meet this week?" Curiosity stirred beneath her calm. Her father, Benjamin Amber, had been a quiet man, a decorated engineer who built not only bridges but legacies. Before his passing, he told her one thing she never forgot. "Never let anyone sign your name for you." She agreed to meet. 2 days later, she sat in McKinney's Midtown office, sunlight spilling across oak shelves lined with law journals and framed family photos. The man himself, dignified and silver-haired, handed her a leather-bound folder. "This," he said, "is the Amber Family Trust. Your father set it up after your mother passed. You were listed as a sole beneficiary once you reached the age of 30. Tiffany blinked. "I never knew about this." McKinney nodded gently. "Your father wasn't a man of many words, but he planned ahead," he said, and I quote, "My daughter's heart will be too big for a world that doesn't deserve her. So, when that world breaks her, make sure she has a way to start again." Her throat tightened. The folder contained legal papers outlining an inheritance, modest by corporate standards, but enough to build a future. A fully vested trust account, 2 small commercial properties in Atlanta, and shares in a family-owned logistics company. She stared at the papers in disbelief. "He never told me. He didn't want to define you," McKinney replied. "But he wanted you to know Amber women don't beg. They build." That night, Tiffany couldn't sleep. She sat at her kitchen table with the trust documents spread out, coffee gone cold beside her. For years, she tied her identity to Femi, his approval, his moods, his needs. She'd spent her life waiting to be chosen, validated, seen. But now, her father's words echoed louder than the city outside. "Never let anyone sign your name for you." She realized that Femi had been signing her name in invisible ink for years, deciding her worth, defining her failures, shaping her silence. No more. By morning, she made calls. She moved part of the trust into a high-yield investment portfolio, began consulting with McKinney on property management, and quietly started saving every extra dollar she earned. For the first time in her life, she wasn't surviving for someone else. She was building for herself, and for the small heartbeat that pulsed within her. Her pregnancy became her compass. Every flutter, every quiet kick reminded her why she couldn't go back. The child represented more than life. It represented proof. Proof that she was not what Femi claimed. Proof that love could be reborn from ruin. She decorated the nursery corner of her apartment in soft neutrals, just enough to remind her that something good still waited ahead. Her co-workers noticed a glow in her face, mistaking it for a new romance. She didn't correct them. Let them think what they wanted. This love didn't need explaining. Weeks turned into months. Tiffany's reflection changed. Stronger jawline, clearer eyes. She no longer flinched at her phone lighting up, no longer felt small when she passed couples on the street. Her life had become her own again. Then one cold Friday afternoon, as she returned home from work, a thick envelope waited on her doorstep. The sender's address was Atlanta County Court. For a moment, she froze. She didn't need to open it to know who it was from. Inside, a stack of official documents stared back. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Femi Branch versus Tiffany Branch. The words were sharp, clinical, final. There was the clean break he wanted all along. She sat down on the couch, reading each page carefully. Femi's signature was bold, confident, as though he'd already won. His listed address was an upscale penthouse in Buckhead. He was living large, unbothered. But as she turned the last page, something inside her shifted. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. Instead, she smiled, a small, steady curve of the lips. For months, she had waited to reclaim her power. Now, the court had given her the chance to do exactly that. She folded the papers neatly, placed them back in the envelope, and whispered the empty room, "Good. Let's finish this." Outside, the city hummed, alive and indifferent. Somewhere across state lines, Femi Branch believed this was the end of her story. He didn't know it was the beginning of her empire. As she gazed out the window, the lights of New York reflected in her eyes, tiny mirrors of everything she had survived. She wasn't a woman who once begged for love. She was a woman who had learned how to build her own. And when the time came to walk into that courtroom, she would no longer walk as Femi's ex-wife. She would walk as Tiffany Amber, heir, mother, and woman reborn. The morning air outside Fulton County Courthouse crackled with energy, the kind that comes when gossip meets justice. Reporters clustered near the marble steps, their cameras poised, microphones gleaming under the Georgia sun. Femi Branch arrived fashionably late. Of course he did. He stepped out of his glossy black Range Rover, his suit a deep, smug blue, the same shade as arrogance. His arm rested lazily around Vanessa King, his mistress-turned-fiancée, whose diamond bracelet caught the light, like a warning signal. Flashes went off instantly. "Mr. Branch, Mr. Branch, is it true the divorce will finalize today? Vanessa, how do you feel about becoming the next Mrs. Branch?" Vanessa's red lips curved into a smirk. "Ecstatic," she purred, tightening her grip on his arm. Femi grinned at the cameras, the grin of a man who believed he had already won. Inside the courthouse, the air was thick with perfume, tension, and quiet expectation. The spectators' benches were full, reporters, distant relatives, nosy socialites. The Branch divorce had become Atlanta's most whispered scandal. The powerful developer dumping his barren wife for a younger woman. Femi sat the front, his lawyer flipping through documents with a bored precision. Vanessa leaned close, whispering something that made him chuckle under his breath. He was so sure this would be clean. Quick. Final. After all, what could Tiffany Amber Branch possibly do to him now? When the bailiff called the session to order, Femi glanced toward the courtroom doors and frowned. She wasn't there yet. His smirk returned. "Figures," he muttered. "Always late. Always dramatic." The judge entered. Papers shuffled, murmurs faded. The clock ticked past 9:30 a.m. Then the doors opened, and the world seemed to stop breathing. Every head turned as Tiffany Amber stepped inside. Gone was the fragile, broken woman who had once begged him to love her. She walked with the calm authority of a queen, every step measured, every gesture deliberate. Her black maternity dress was sleek, elegant, her hair drawn into a low knot that caught the sunlight filtering to the courtroom windows. But it wasn't her poise that silenced the room. It was the undeniable curve of her belly. She was heavily pregnant. Gasps rippled through the spectators. Phones buzzed quietly as whispers turned to stunned silence. Femi's laughter died in his throat. He blinked once, twice, like a man seeing a ghost. Vanessa's hand fell from his arm. For the first time in his life, Femi Branch had no idea what to say. The judge cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. "Mrs. Branch, are you prepared to proceed?" Tiffany nodded gracefully. "Yes, Your Honor." Even her voice was different. Steady, deep, unshaken. Femi couldn't stop staring. The same woman he had called Barren. The same woman he had humiliated in public. The same woman he had left alone in a hospital bed. And now she stood before him, glowing with life. His life. The proceedings began mechanically. The judge reviewing the petition, the division of assets, the custody clauses. But everyone knew the real case wasn't on paper. It was written on Femi's face. When the judge finally turned to Tiffany, his tone softened. "Mrs. Branch, do you wish to make any statements before I finalize the decree?" The courtroom went still. Every camera, every eye, every breath waited for her answer. Tiffany looked at Femi, not with hate, not even anger, but something colder. Pity. Then she spoke. "Your Honor," she began, her voice cutting to the silence like silk over steel. "I only want the record to show one thing. The truth doesn't need defending. It shows itself." The judge tilted his head, intrigued. "Meaning?" She met Femi's eyes. "Meaning, I don't need to explain why I'm standing here today. I don't need to defend my womanhood, my worth, or the life growing inside me. The truth's been here all along. He just refused to see it." A collective murmur swept through the gallery. Vanessa's face turned pale. Tiffany continued, steady, unflinching. "I was called Barren. Weak. Unfit to be a wife. He told me I wasn't enough, that my body had failed him. And I believed it for a long time. Until I realized it wasn't my body that was barren. It was his soul." Gasps. A few muffled cheers. The judge banged his gavel once, half-heartedly. Femi's mouth opened, but no words came out. His lawyer leaned in, whispering, "Don't react." But it was too late. Every eye was on him. The husband who'd abandoned his wife in a hospital bed, now staring at the proof of his cruelty. Tiffany turned toward the judge again. "I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for closure. I want my name back, my peace back, and my future for myself and my child. That's all." The judge nodded solemnly. Request granted. Divorce finalized. The gavel struck wood. Sharp, final. It was done. But as Femi sat there, the weight of silence pressing against his chest, something inside him cracked. His confidence, his pride, his image, all shattered in one public instant. He stared at her belly again, realization dawning in slow, horrifying waves. It was his child. It had to be. Vanessa's voice broke the silence, sharp and venomous. "Femi, what the hell is this?" He didn't answer. He couldn't, because deep down he knew. Every cruel word he'd ever said, every insult, every moment of neglect, had come back to bury him alive in front of the world. As Tiffany gathered her papers, the courtroom buzzed with whispers and camera clicks. She didn't rush. She didn't look back. She simply walked toward the exit, her heels striking the floor like a countdown. When she reached the doorway, she paused, just long enough to turn her head and meet his eyes one last time. Her gaze was calm, almost merciful. "You once said I'd never carry your name forward," she said softly. "You were half right. I won't carry your name, but I'll carry ours. And this time, it'll mean something." Then she was gone. Outside, the courthouse exploded into chaos. Reporters shouting, cameras flashing, Vanessa storming past with mascara streaked down her face. But Femi didn't move. He just sat there, frozen, hands limp on the table. In that moment, everything he'd built, the image, the power, the control, turned to dust. Because the woman he threw away had walked back and not, as a wife begging for love, but as a mother carrying truth itself. He sank into his chair as the last words of her statement replayed in his head like a haunting refrain. The truth doesn't need defending. It shows itself. And for the first time, Femi finally saw himself clearly. Not the man he thought he was, but the man he had become. Small, cruel, hollow. The courtroom emptied around him. Reporters' voices echoed faintly through the marble halls. And as he sat there alone, one question burned through the silence. How do you defend yourself when the truth stands right in front of you, breathing? If this scene didn't make your heart twist just a little, you might want to check it's still beating. Because let's be honest, how many women have been blamed, shamed, or broken down, only to rise when no one expected it? If Tiffany's walk into that courtroom hit something in you, stop scrolling. Hit subscribe right now. Because these stories, the ones that make you furious, proud, and speechless, are the stories we tell for every woman who was ever called less than. And if you still don't want to subscribe, tell me in the comments why. I'll wait. The next morning, the courthouse was quieter. The frenzy from the previous day had dulled to murmurs and whispers, but the air still carried tension like static. Femi Branch walked in with a heavy, uneven gait of a man who hadn't slept. His jaw was tight, his eyes bloodshot. Gone was the confident stride that had once drawn cameras. Vanessa King was nowhere in sight. The courthouse gallery wasn't as full as before, but the people who came, reporters, bloggers, lawyers, had one thing in common. They wanted to see how far the mighty Branch would fall. Tiffany sat the front beside Harold McKinney, her father's old attorney. Harold's silver hair and calm composure made him look more like a professor than a lawyer, but his presence carried weight. He had been part of her life since childhood. The man who drafted her trust, her inheritance, and every financial safeguard her late father had envisioned. Today, he wasn't just her legal counsel. He was her shield. The proceedings began with Femi's attorney attempting to regain control. "Your Honor," he began, voice sharp with performative outrage. "Mr. Branch seeks equitable division of marital assets, given his financial contributions during the course of the marriage. Mrs. Branch has benefited," Harold interrupted smoothly, "from her own inheritance, not from Mr. Branch's accounts, which I might add are significantly overdrawn." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Mr. McKinney, are you saying the marital properties are not jointly owned?" Harold adjusted his glasses. "Not in the way Mr. Branch assumes. Your Honor, with your permission, I'd like to submit Exhibit 14 through 19, deeds, account records, and corporate filings showing that Mrs. Branch is the sole controlling shareholder of the Branch Amber Trust, which owns 82% of properties and businesses listed." Femi's head snapped toward Harold. "That's impossible. Those were joint acquisitions." Harold didn't even look at him. Acquisitions funded through the Amber Trust, a legacy established by Mrs. Branch's late father, George Amber, in 2008. Mr. Branch signed prenuptial acknowledgments prior to marriage, granting full separation of inherited and marital assets. He benefited from their use but never held ownership. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Even the judge leaned back slightly, hiding a faint smirk behind his hand. Femi's lawyer scrambled. "Your Honor, these claims must be verified. Mr. Branch has every right to half of what was built during the union." Harold turned a page in his binder with deliberate calm. "Half of what he built, yes. But this," he gestured to the stack of documents, "was never his to begin with." He slid one more document across the table. "Also, we have evidence of Mr. Branch using Mrs. Branch's credit line to secure business loans without her consent. The Amber Trust covered over $300,000 in liabilities he created. Therefore, under Georgia law, not only is he not entitled to assets, he owes restitution." The courtroom erupted into whispers. Femi's skin flushed crimson. His hand clenched into a fist on the table. "You're lying," he hissed, voice trembling. Tiffany didn't flinch. She kept her gaze steady, unbothered, her presence as unyielding as granite. The judge reviewed the files for several minutes. The silence, so thick it felt like time itself had paused. Then he finally looked up. "Mr. Branch," he said evenly, "I've reviewed enough to reach a preliminary conclusion. Your counsel can file objections later, but the facts are clear. He glanced at Tiffany. Mrs. Branch, you're the beneficiary of a protected trust. Your assets remain solely yours. As for the marriage dissolution, the court grants full divorce effective immediately. Femi's lawyer jumped up. But, Your Honor, the judge raised a hand, cutting him off. And one more thing. He looked at Femi, eyes narrowing. You called this woman Barren. He let the word hang in the air, heavy, damning. Seems to me, Mrs. Branch is far more fruitful than your investments. A ripple of laughter spread through the courtroom. Even the clerk tried to hide a grin. Femi's face contorted, a mix of humiliation and disbelief. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Harold leaned toward Tiffany and whispered, He'll remember that line longer than any verdict. She almost smiled. Almost. But her expression stayed composed, poised. There was no gloating, no satisfaction, just quiet closure. The judge nodded to her. Mrs. Branch, you may sign the final decree. She reached for the pen with steady fingers. The same motion she had once performed in sorrow. The day she signed her marriage papers. The day she signed away her hope. She now did with power. The pen glided across the document, her name flowing in elegant strokes. Tiffany Amber Branch. The sound of ink meeting paper was small, but it echoed louder than any verdict. Femi's eyes followed the pen like it was sealing his tomb, because in a way it was. When she finished, she set the pen down gently and slid the papers back across the table. Thank you, Your Honor, she said softly. Then she turned to Femi for the first time that day. Her eyes were calm, steady, the eyes of a woman who had survived every storm he created. You used to say my name like it meant nothing, she said quietly. Now it's the only thing you'll never touch again. She rose, her black dress catching the light, and walked out of the courtroom without looking back. Femi sat frozen, the judge's gavel still echoing faintly. His lawyer whispered something about appeals, but it was useless. The damage was irreversible. All he could see was her signature, bold, deliberate, final. The same hand that had once cooked his dinners and wiped her tears had just written the ending to his empire. As the courtroom emptied, he stayed behind, staring at the empty chair where she'd sat, her perfume still lingering faintly in the air. For the first time in his life, Femi Branch realized what real power looked like. And it wasn't money or status or control. It was freedom, the kind that comes from a woman signing her name and meaning it. The story broke before sunrise. Headlines spread across every corner of the internet like wildfire. Divorced wife wins case. Pregnant with ex's child. From Barren to billion-dollar heiress. The redemption of Tiffany Branch. Justice served in Atlanta. The woman who outsmarted her husband. By noon, reporters were camped outside her Brooklyn apartment. Cameras ready, voices overlapping as they shouted her name into the humid New York air. Mrs. Branch, how does it feel to finally be free? Are the rumors true? You're launching a women's fund? Is the baby his? Through it all, Tiffany Amber Branch remained composed. She never hid, never ran. Instead, she stepped out each morning in soft neutrals, sunglasses shielding her eyes, one hand resting protectively over her growing belly. No words, no dramatics, just quiet grace that spoke louder than any statement could. The same world that once pitted her now stood in awe. Weeks passed, and the noise began to fade. Freedom didn't feel like fireworks. It felt like breathing again. In her small but sunlit office overlooking the East River, Tiffany drafted plans for something new. Something that would turn her pain into purpose. With Harold McKinney's guidance and her sister Danielle's unwavering support, she founded the Amber Foundation, an organization dedicated to helping women rebuild their lives after toxic relationships and emotional abuse. Not everyone gets a courtroom victory, she told Harold as they finalized the paperwork, but they deserve a second chance to start again. He smiled softly. Your father will be proud, Tiffany. He always said you had a spine of steel hidden under all that kindness. She looked down at the documents, her name printed boldly across the top. For the first time, she loved the way it looked. The foundation launched 3 months later with an intimate gala at a midtown hotel. No tabloids, no scandal. Just a room filled with survivors, supporters, and quiet power. The chandelier light shimmered across silver tablecloths as Tiffany stood at the podium in a simple ivory gown that glowed against her warm skin. As the applause faded, she looked out at the crowd. Faces of women who had lost everything and were fighting to begin again. Her hand brushed over her belly before she spoke. "Sometimes," she began, her voice steady but filled with emotion, "the miracle isn't that they come back. It's that we survive after they leave." The audience was silent, not because they didn't understand, but because they did. She continued softly, "For years, I thought freedom meant forgiveness. I thought it meant closure. But I've learned it means something simpler. Waking up and realizing I can build again, and this time it's mine." Tears shimmered in the eyes of women across the room. When she finished, the applause rose like a wave, not for scandal or spectacle, but for rebirth. Later that night, as the last guest filtered out, Tiffany stepped out onto the terrace. The Manhattan skyline glittered beyond her, reflections of possibility in every light. She inhaled the cool air and smiled faintly, one hand on her belly. Flashbulbs popped as photographers called her name from the street below. But this time, the light didn't feel invasive. It felt earned. Tiffany Amber Branch, once broken, now reborn, had become the picture of quiet power. Her freedom wasn't in walking away. It was in knowing she never had to look back. The winter morning was quiet. Too quiet for Femi Branch, who sat in the corner of a nearly empty apartment that once overlooked Atlanta's skyline. The blinds were half broken, the air heavy with the scent of dust and regret. The world had moved on without him. Vanessa had left the moment the accounts froze. Investors had pulled their funding. Friends stopped answering his calls. Now there were only bills stacked on the coffee table, and echoes of a life that used to gleam. He sat there, slumped his chair, scrolling absently through headlines he couldn't bear to read. Femi Branch declared insolvent after the divorce settlement. Vanessa King deletes all photos of former fiancé. Tiffany Amber Branch launches $10 million fund for women's empowerment. That last one stung most. The woman he once mocked as Barren had built an empire from ashes, hers and his. A soft knock interrupted the silence. The mailman stood at the door, holding a single cream-colored envelope. "No return address," he said, "but it looks important." Femi frowned, taking it. His name was written in elegant black ink across the front. Mr. Femi Branch. He recognized the handwriting instantly. Tiffany's. He sat back down, the paper trembling slightly in his hands. The seal bore her initials, T.A., embossed in gold above the crest of the Amber Foundation. For a moment, he just stared at it, unsure whether to open it or burn it. But curiosity, or maybe guilt, won. He broke the seal carefully, the flap tearing with a quiet sigh. Inside was a single sheet of stationery, her handwriting graceful and deliberate. "You taught me what love isn't. For that, I thank you. T.A." That was all. No bitterness. No accusations. No explanations. Just peace, the kind he'd never known how to give. He read it again and again until the letters blurred. Then he folded the paper neatly, as though any sudden movement might destroy the last thing she'd ever given him. He wanted to laugh or cry, but nothing came. For the first time in his life, Femi Branch had nothing left to say. Miles away, the city was waking up. In Central Park, morning sunlight spilled across frosted grass, turning every breath into silver mist. Tiffany Amber Branch walked slowly along the path, her scarf fluttering in the cold wind. The city was alive around her. Joggers, dog walkers, the distant hum of taxis. Yet all she heard was the rhythm of her own steps and the soft, steady heartbeat beneath her palm. Her hand rested gently on her belly, feeling the small life that moved inside. "You'll never have to beg to be loved," she whispered. "That's my promise." The words caught in her throat for a moment. A vow, a prayer, a release. She smiled, blinking back tears, and looked up at the rising sun cutting through the city skyline. Somewhere inside that light, she felt her father's presence, his quiet wisdom, his voice saying, "You did it your way, baby girl." And she had Later that morning in her Manhattan office, the day's first light gleamed off the glass walls, scattering across marble floors and fresh white lilies on her desk. The view stretched across the city she had claimed as her own, bold, unbroken, and hers alone. On the desk before her lay a new contract. Not one tied to marriage or compromise, but to the expansion of the Amber Foundation, partnering with major corporations to empower women across the country. Harold McKinney waited patiently beside her, his familiar smile warm. "This is it," he said. "The biggest deal yet." Tiffany nodded, pen in hand. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the glass tabletop, calm, confident, and free. No trembling, no hesitation. Not this time. She signed her name, Tiffany Amberbranch, the ink flowing like a final, perfect chord in a symphony long overdue. The sound of the pen scratching against paper filled the room. Simple, quiet, powerful. As she set the pen down, sunlight poured over her, bathing her in gold. She looked out at the skyline again, at the endless stretch of steel and possibility, and felt the weight of everything she'd endured finally lift. Sometimes victory didn't roar. Sometimes it just smiled. Outside, cameras flashed through the glass as reporters gathered below. The headlines they'd print tomorrow didn't matter. She wasn't a story anymore. She was the author. Tiffany turned toward the window, her voice a whisper meant only for herself, and for the future that waited just beyond the horizon. "Sometimes," she said, her lips curving into a quiet smile, "the most powerful signature isn't the one that ends a marriage. It's the one that begins a legacy." Hey, before you go, if Tiffany's story hit something in you, take a second right now. Tap like, hit subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read every single one. And if you want to see what Tiffany builds next, or watch another story where heartbreak turns into strength, check out the 2 stories pinned right here on screen after this one.